Yeah, happy to do that. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here today. So as Lulu said, I'm the managing partner of a law firm called CMS. We're headquartered in London. It's an international law firm. So for those that don't know the law sector, international law firms tend to be either headquartered in London or somewhere in the US. So I look after one that's headquartered here in London. We're the 5th biggest law firm in the world, with lots of offices across the world. And we focus on a real broad range of particularly commercial law. It's a great sector to be in, probably not particularly well known, but probably the law is one of the places where the UK still leads the world, and about a third of the world follows the UK, particularly the English and Welsh legal system. So in a time of chaos, it's good to know that the rule of law is probably one of our biggest exports. My connections with Scotland are that I started my career in Aberdeen and spent many years there before moving to London a couple of years ago in the current role. So spent most of my time in Scotland, now based in East London.
Brilliant. Thanks. On to you.
Yeah, thank you, Lulu. My name is Colin Stewart, and as Lulu said, I'm sort of managing director of Citi here in Scotland. It's an investment bank. It is headquartered in New York. We operate in over 100 countries around the world, and I'm privileged to lead our business here in Scotland. It's a thriving business, and it's a business which some of you may not be more less than me. It's not a high street bank, much investment related, but we have a huge obligation and responsibility to society. Particularly, we probably during the financial crisis, banks had a bit of a bad name, and I think it was up to people like me and others to really make sure we were significant spheres of influence during that time. I'm based and I live in Edinburgh, and heavily involved in the business community. I helped set up a Christian organisation called Business Matters. We're also supporting this event today, and that has been fantastic. But I think that the theme is spheres of influence. And I think each of us, in whatever role we play, have influence to exert. And I think we, both Stephen and I and others, have real responsibility for those leadership roles that we've been placed in.
Thank you very much. So the way that we're going to sort of frame our discussion today, it's going to take two parts. So the discussion, we're going to think about being a Christian influence. So what that unpack that for the first, and then the second part of our conversation, more broadly the sector, and think about their impact on society at large. First section, so the influence organization is, so as senior leader, what does it look like work to carry the presence of God into your? Would you like to kick us off?
Sure, thank you. Well, it's God's with us each day, and we take Him to work every single day. I always say that church, church should have a time on Sunday for a bit of rest because the battlefield starts on the Monday morning. And I think one of the things that I always like to think of that is probably in three separate ways, really. I think first of all, I think we've really got to be motivated to do in the workplace. I'm a great believer that motivation is everything. That is, motivates your teams, it motivates you as an individual. And for me, there are two key things that dictate, or two values that I take to work each day. I think the first one is love. Love is the ultimate motivation that we all have, and integrity. Integrity reveals our motivation, and I think that's really, really important. And I certainly found in my career, particularly in financial services, integrity is really, really critical. And where things tend to go off the wagon, the wheels come off the wagon a little bit, is when we lose that integrity and that value system. And I'm sure as we go through this conversation, we can talk about where sometimes, you know, our value system as a Christian has been threatened or challenged, and I can share some good examples for that as well. But it's all about, you know, that motivation. It's how you go about it. It's how you engage with people, how you encourage people, and we often talk about that kind of servanthood, how we treat people. And again, I'm sure we'll talk about some real examples of how we treat individuals, those with, you know, the patience and the kindness, compassion and gentleness, which sometimes in our environment, which can often seem as a very hostile environment, you look out and it can be quite difficult and hard from the outside. But inside there, we bring that love each day, we bring that integrity, and that helps motivate our staff. And again, you know, it's how people recognize you as a Christian in the workplace. And certainly in this day and age, when we have to be so careful about what we say and how we say it, we should always take the opportunity, as I do each day, to let people know that we are Christian and that we share that love for them and that we're there to help and work with them. And that should ooze from you what you do and how you do each day. And that's what I try to do when I take to work each day.
Brilliant. And Stephen, what are your...
Yeah, probably a couple of thoughts. One, I think, is probably, you know, your question is about what does it mean for a senior leader, but in many ways it's no different for a senior leader from anybody else about how you take God to work. Because I think it's probably about how we approach our work. And two things that I'd like to just focus on is, one, that I love to remember about the fact that we have a creator God, and in the workplace, most of what all of us will be doing is part of God's creation, and there will be a creative to actually what we are doing. We are creating solutions for our customers, making sure that things get done, interacting with each other. So there's a real creative element to the workplace. And the second thing is that God is a real worker God, and He worked for the 6 days and then took rest. And so for us, it's not in the sense that taking God to work, you know, in the same way that we don't take God to church, we don't take God to a family gathering. God is with us everywhere, and the workplace is one of the core parts that God has commissioned for us as people to be is workers, and in that to then go and be creative in that sense. But you did ask the question about a senior leader, and one thing that probably weighs on my mind then, that is, there's the verse that speaks in Luke 12:48, which says that to whom much is given, much is expected. And so I always meditate on that as someone who is a leader, and again, that will apply to many of us. It doesn't need to be that you need to be in top management for that. We'll all probably be different leaders within our organization, that where much of us has been given to us, then much more is expected. So I do think that as we become more senior, probably more is expected of us, to be more forthright, to be more determined, to be more the one that sets the tone across the workplace. So that's the reflections I have.
Brilliant. That's great. I think, you know, when I think about this and I think about being a Christian in the workplace, the thing that comes to me is this whole idea of influence. You know, I really believe that God has put us in our workplaces for a reason, and our workplaces should be different because we're there. And I think that particularly when you are in senior leadership positions, being able to, you know, use your influence to glorify God, to, you know, advance the kingdom of God, to show the love of Jesus, I think can be really powerful. And so I've just really been thinking around this whole idea of influence and what we can do in the workplace. So do any of you guys have any examples of where you've been able to sort of, you know, influence things to move in a particular direction that honors God? Any examples or any thoughts around that? Colin?
Yeah, I've got a thought. I want to tell you a story, which I think is a very powerful story, and sometimes you never know the answers to a story until many years later. But I want to tell you the story of it happened to me a few years ago when I was dealing directly with a very senior CEO of a FTSE 100 company. Very high profile individual, won't mention the name in case some of you know him. But we'd been working on something together and something had gone wrong. And he picked up the phone to me personally. And really, it's one of the only occasions in my life when I sort of recall that almost that little cartoon character of having to hold the telephone away from me, because the abuse that I was getting from this guy was just incredible. The swearing, just the way he was treating me as an individual, it was worse than you would treat a dog, sort of thing. And he said, I'm going to march. I'm coming to see you in person in your office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Be ready for me. So 8 o'clock, he rocks up. The meeting rooms full of all the people who needed to solve the particular problem that we're trying to solution for. And I took him aside. And I said to him, you're now in my territory, and you come on my terms. And I showed him love, and I talked about integrity. And that meeting, almost instantly, that meeting changed. And successful, and anyhow, roll forward 5 years. And I had the opportunity to go, this chap was moving on, and he was having a kind of farewell dinner. With probably more than hundreds of people at the dinner. And he said to me, he was talking about his career and some of the things he had been doing. And he said, I just want to highlight one thing to you, and the person in this room will know what I'm talking about, but somebody 5 years ago transformed my life.
Wow.
I had been a bully. I did not know God at that point. And all of a sudden, from that point forward, I looked at work in a new way. And as a result, he developed a phenomenal business during that time, left it in good shape, and has gone on to do amazing things. But he said, up until that point, his life changed. And again, those words that you never know, and that's one thing I always say, always make time for people, because you never know that one moment, that one word that you say can be transformational. That's what we're all called upon to do, is when that minute comes, and we never know when it's going to come, but if we hold to our value system, then it will deliver results.
That's good. I like that example. I think, it just shows how our attitude, when we are in the workplace, when we are engaging with our colleagues, can really make an impact. And bringing our godly values into those situations is so important. And it's amazing how that just turned around that situation, and he remembered it so many years later. So yeah, that's a great story. That's great. Stephen, any thoughts?
Well, what I was probably wanting to focus on was that I find that the language we use can be incredibly important. And when you are in a leadership place, I think you have the opportunity to communicate with people on a very regular basis. And I think one of the falsehoods is that we think that we've not got a good God day in the office unless we share our testimony with someone. But that don't happen very often. But we have the ability to share our testimony in the language that we use. I think the thing about the Christian faith is that there is some incredibly attractive language and incredibly attractive concepts that we can use on a day-to-day basis. So for example, the use of the word grace, I try to use it as much as possible. It's a very attractive word. It's a very attractive concept. People get it. They want to run towards it. Another concept of the whole teaching of don't let the sun go down in your anger. Anytime you see anyone with disagreements, the two of you must get together now, because from my own perspective, you never let the sun go down in your anger. Things that relate on a very day-to-day basis. In fact, as I was saying just before this call, earlier today, I had another one of these sessions with 250 people from our workplace. It was the Women's Network, it was Diversity Network, Carers Network. One of the things so it was all about diversity and a lot of the things that they were concerned about in that regard. But one of the things that we're speaking about, particularly at this time of going back to the office, is that we have a whole lot of probably senior associates, those sorts of people who love working at home, but the people who are really struggling are the new trainees, the new starts and whatever. That was a great place where I just spoke about, it was a moment for maximum grace between two different groups of people within the business. And people got it and people understood, and there was actually lots of messages that came through afterwards just on that part of, oh, we often think about diversity as male, female or something else. Oh, I can see you've now highlighted another place of where people could be separate, but how we can bring them together by emphasizing how we can inconvenience ourselves to help other people. So I think in the language we use, it's one place that we can use it on a very day-to-day basis. And I think there's a whole range of words which are very Christian words and Christian concepts. If we pepper our language with that, it becomes a very day-to-day thing, which is helpful. The second part I just highlight is at the start of all of this current COVID crisis, I think there is sometimes, and this is probably a little bit more like Colin's example, there can be some big moments that we have. And probably one of the big moments there was that we have a monthly call with all of our partners. It's about 450 people on a similar format to this. And it's all about business. It's all about different things around the world. On that very first call, when we were all going into lockdown and everybody was very uncertain, I sort of said at the end, look, everybody knows I'm part of the Christian network. And I have someone who has faith. I don't speak about it a huge amount in the most express way in the business. But at the start of this crisis, I just want to name where my foundation is. And I was able then to go on and speak through the verse from 2 Timothy, which is, for God does not give us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. And so it was about not going into this with any sense of fear, because God's in control. And so there's just that one moment where you can name something. So I think it's looking out for those moments. Sadly, they don't come that often, is my experience. But there are the moments. So it's trying to capture the special moments, but then trying to use things which brings faith into things on a day-to-day basis. Even if people don't appreciate it, you know where your intent is and you can actually pray into it and the like.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Because the thing is, like, the gospel is for everyday life, right? So I like what you were saying about sort of peppering your language, putting in these concepts like grace and that sort of a thing. Because at the end of the day, the Bible has something to say about all aspects of life, and so it isn't just about the big moments. So the big moments are great, and we should look out for those opportunities when they come. But I think just in our day-to-day life and the values that we exhibit and the language that we use, I think it can have an impact. Yeah.
I think it's also the example we said as well. I think, a lot of people look to see, again, as Stephen was saying, during this COVID-19 crisis, people often look, what would you do, in this situation? How would you approach it? And again, I think it's, we've got to, each day and how we act and how we behave. That is the moments of grace that we have each and every day, and how we treat people and always make time for people. I often get accused at work of making. If you speak to my assistant, he said you make too much time for people, and I think you've got to make time for people. When they pop in, when they phone you up, or when those moments of interruption. You're showing respect to people, and you've got that moment, and giving that moment for your time and listening to their story. It's all about accessibility, and and I think sometimes leaders have got to be very careful they're not seen locked up in ivory towers and don't come out from the 42nd floor of some skyscraper building. We've got to be with our teams and with our people, and demonstrating what we do each day, really.
Yeah. I think that, you know, as Christians in the workplace, I think we are called to exhibit something different to others. So like that example you gave about making time for people, I think that's great because, you know, we're showing that because we've got Jesus, you know, we're putting that value on people the way that he has put value on us. So I think that's really powerful. And Stephen, I like the example that you gave as well about having that talk, you know, with your colleagues talking about, you know, not fearing and you know, having that hope. And it sort of makes me think about, you know, the story in the Bible of the disciples were in a boat and there's like the storm, the wind and the waves were raging and they were worried and Jesus was just sleeping calmly in the boat. And I think it is powerful when we as Christians, you know, in the midst of what can look like a fearful situation, I think it is powerful when we can sort of help people to know that there is a God that we can trust in, that we don't want to come from a place of fear. It would be great to unpack a little bit more about this whole sort of, you know, leading through difficult situations, you know. Have either of you had experience of, and I'm sure you have, you know, in the roles that you're in, you know, experience of, you know, leading through difficult and uncertain times? You know, what have your experiences been? What are your thoughts around that? How do you think that as Christians we can handle these situations differently to others? Stephen, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I think in uncertain times, we have a foundation, and naming that foundation, relying on that foundation. I think what you said about having a calmness through a storm is very important. But no, there's lots of opportunity for empathy through difficult times. Reaching out and helping people in all the different situations. So, yeah, probably just being very sure of our own footing, and then a care out into the organisation has probably been the key themes.
Great, Colin.
Yeah, just another story, which I think is always good to illustrate points. I think one of the things, my oldest son is in the army, major in the army, and I remember when he was passing out at Sandhurst, his passing out parade, the speech that was given, and the speech that was given, this was at a time when, you know, a lot of young soldiers were immediately graduating from Sandhurst and then heading off to Afghanistan. And the person giving the speech said, you know, when in those dark moments in Afghanistan, when as a young officer you're with your men and something has gone badly wrong, they're going to turn around and look at you and say, what do we do? And he said, don't worry, because you'll know what to do, because you've been trained. In many ways, I think that's us as Christians. You know, we've been trained. You know, our whole life is getting to know God, getting to understand. We go through a life of training for that one moment, when the difficult moment. And again, it's, you know, one of the things I've certainly found during COVID-19 is, you know, communication, you know, is one of the biggest gifts that we're given. And that can give a huge message to people. But it was interesting, you know, I've been hosting with my own team, which is several hundred people, a weekly call when I, you know, during COVID, every Wednesday, 11 o'clock, and it's an open call where people can just ask me questions and I kind of give some thoughts on what's happening. And I thought, I've been doing this every Wednesday for the last 6 months, and I thought, maybe now's the time to hang up the hat and just say, you know, we've done it enough. And I always had a revolution on my hand, because people want it. They want that information. They like that interaction with people. So I think during times of crisis, what we can do as leaders, whether it's, you know, financial sector or political leaders, it's all about really good communication. And don't worry what you have to say, because you'll be given the words to say. You'll be trained all your life for these moments. And I think that is the real gift that each of us have been given.
Brilliant. So we've got a question from the floor. So the question is around, you know, have you, you know, during your career, Have you been able to engage with other Christians to provide sort of mutual encouragement and support, either of you? And how has that been?
Yeah, lots of times, and in the workplace we have a Christian group, which they have a few different meetings. The one that I particularly attend is a prayer meeting on a Thursday morning, and it's a range of people that come from across the business and across different countries and the like. And that I find really encouraging as a means just to be able to share with a group of people. Every time we meet to pray, we pray for the protection of the organisation and for God's blessing on it. We always pray for God's grace to flow in the place. And this part I was speaking about was about God being a creative God. Every part of our organisations is part of God's creation and can be used and glorified for Him. And in the modern world, almost the most important parts of our organisation, if you're looking at physical things, it's not the people, then it's lots of wires and software and all sorts of things. And actually thinking of that as God's great creation and how that can all be used and protected, I just find very refreshing. So that's the part that I probably connect in mostly with people in the organisation, and we encourage each other.
Great.
I would certainly say one of the reasons I and others kind of started Business Matters many years ago was for that very reason. Very often it can be quite lonely in the workplace, no matter who you are. And some organisations, it's more difficult to organise Christian groups within organisations. But I think what we can do, and sort of I've found, is that with organisations like Business Matters, Business Connections, others, you're making connections with other Christians in other businesses, and we can learn from one another. And I certainly have found that when I've had some challenging things or not quite sure how to handle a situation, very often I've got a very good friend in the legal profession. I tend to meet him for a coffee, and we'll chat about what the particular issue is, and I'll gain his insight as well. So I think it's about, it's amazing how Christians find one another no matter where you are. And I think there's an amazing network, and I think we just need to make sure we use that in different ways. But we always know that where 2 or 3 are gathered, then He will be with us as well. And I think that's the great thing, whether it's a small trio meeting for breakfast or coffee and praying together, or whether it's bigger groups. I think there are great opportunities for us to help one another, and I think that's the key thing, is just using those groups, one for learning and for teaching, but also for support and encouragement when sometimes you don't always know what to do.
Yeah, I think it is important to have that community. I think even just having people to bounce ideas off of or experiences, it can really help. So it's great.
And you tend to find that people in the workplace, all facing very, very similar pressures. And nowadays, I think particularly for young people trying to balance, family life, professional development life, I probably spend more time speaking to people about that these days, about how they balance all this in life between all the demands. We seem to have all the great technologies, but we just seem to be under a lot more pressure, a lot more uncertainty, and people need some guidance to help them navigate their way around, really.
Yeah. It's interesting you should talk about, different issues that people are facing at home and things like that. And, in business, we often hear this term, bring your whole self to work, and I think as well, particularly with COVID, people have had to, more of their family life is sort of merged into their work life and things like that. And I think that there's a real opportunity there to sort of, I guess, show our humanity and our compassion, share that with people and recognize that they're real people. It's not just about the work that we do, but it's also about the person as well. And I think there's a great opportunity for us as Christians to connect with people on that level. Do any of you have any thoughts around that? Stephen, any thoughts?
Probably nothing further to add on that one.
Okay.
I think one of the things that's been interesting during lockdown, and as we've got people working from home, I think, one of the things I spend a lot of time saying to people is, you've got to trust people, and trust people to do the right thing. And sometimes if you set them in the right way, you will find that most of the people work that way. And so during lockdown, as people were trying to manage their professional life, homeschooling of children, partners, spouses at home, all the demands of trying to work, scramble for the limited internet capacity you had. I think it's trusting people to do things. So I certainly found in our business, by trusting people a lot more during COVID, our productivity, our output actually improved significantly. And that's been a huge lesson for me during this time, is actually, if you set the direction, trust people a lot more, and you'll be amazed what happens.
Brilliant. So we've mentioned COVID a couple of times, so let's talk about it. So, we're in the midst of a pandemic, there's a recession. It would be great to hear it from both of you, both from a finance and a legal perspective, and just sort of a wider perspective. What do you think are the challenges ahead? What do you think are the opportunities?
Maybe I'll take that one. Yeah, happy to take that first. I think one of the things at the outset of the pandemic, which I found so striking, is that, like probably many people, I have one of these Bible in 1 year programs, and there's probably lots of passages in the Old Testament that sound like from a bygone age that you never think is going to be repeated. But yeah, no, reading there all about isolation when there was disease and various things, and the various pandemics and things that are mentioned in the Old Testament. I think the first thing is that we're living in a situation at the moment that God's seen it all before. It's not that this is somehow God's had a crisis and this is a big problem and he's not going to be able to actually step up to this one. So I think that's the first thing, that this is something which has been allowed to happen at this time in humankind for a particular reason. And I am reflecting that one of the things is that whilst we all in many ways would like to go back to whatever normal was before, when we actually now step back some time after when we had some normality, there was an awful lot of aspects of normal that weren't actually very good. And Colin's mentioned some of those. And one of the concepts that I found very helpful from the Bible, and it's not a perfect analogy, but I think it has many, many helpful aspects, is the whole concept of Jubilee in the Old Testament. There was these periods where there was a point where there was the before and there was the after, and there was a freeing that happened through because of something significant that had happened at that time. And at that time it was slaves being freed, and it's all about property changing hands and debts being repaid and various things. But the analogy is not that bad. There's a vast amount of our country that was a slave to the commute, an absolute slave to the commute. They couldn't answer back. They were owned by the commute. And there were many families that were living just in time schedules, that nothing could go wrong to be in Colin's office at the time that Colin expected, to be doing their work and whatever. But now suddenly we've found a new way where flexibility can actually flow into things. So I think that I've probably got myself to a place of seeing this as being a God-given opportunity, which I don't understand why we've got it, to reset a whole lot of what we do. And it's full of opportunity, because if we have to look critically at the past and see a huge number of things there that we were just bonkers to follow that sort of lifestyle. And by God's grace and the creation that has kept moving on, we can actually live in a completely different way going forward. I spent almost all of my career never seeing the children in the morning. I only ever saw them in the evening. and that wasn't healthy. Now there's a whole new opportunity to do that differently going forward. So I think it's full of opportunity now, and I think we need to let go of the past and work out what the future looks like. And I think it is, it's full of different opportunities along the lines of what I've mentioned.
Brilliant. Yeah, I like that whole idea of it's a chance to reset. Yeah, I like that. I agree.
Yeah,
I
think it's right. I would certainly agree with what Stephen said. I think, if you see the amount of time that people have spent commuting, it's just incredible. How people have done that. But I would say a couple of things. Certainly, I felt a huge responsibility during COVID. I felt a bit of pressure on my shoulders to do something about it. And to try and make things better. And I'm very privileged. I serve on a couple of government committees, both at a national and a Scottish level. I felt this is an opportunity for me being placed there to influence how we're going to get through this recession. And and what will society look like when we come out of it? And certainly, I know we had Kate at Forbes yesterday. Kate and I have been working together. As two Christians of significant influence in the Scottish government to make things better in Scotland, to look at some of the inequalities and look about what we can do, and not go back to some of the old ways, and create opportunities for people, and particularly young people. And I spend a lot of my career with different organizations helping young people to develop our future. So I think as we think about young people and their the mess they've had in the school environment, what is the workplace going to look like, and how we reshape that, and what role will they play in this broken society. And it's interesting, Steve was saying, if you think we've now got the opportunity for families to be together, not outsourcing everything to people, to actually spend time together, to learn to be together, and use that as an opportunity to create the community that we want to operate in. And we saw some great examples during COVID of looking out for people's neighbours. Love thy neighbour, we all know that very, very well. Let's hope it doesn't stop. Let's hope we do continue to speak, and some of the bad things we've done, we leave them behind. But we've got to make sure that we create opportunity for people to work, because that creates economic value, economic growth and wealth, and that will help us develop as a country. And I think it's we as people who can start directing some of that stuff. We need to do that now, because again, it's the story I gave earlier. Some of the things we will do now, we'll never see the results. They often say you'll never see, or you might be your grandchildren, your great grandchildren will see. So I think we have each of us has a responsibility as we come out this pandemic, to reshape the world in some way. And I think as Christians, we are rightly placed to do that.
Yeah, I agree. As I was sort of preparing for this session and thinking about the finance and legal sector, it did strike me that, these are sectors that really touch all industries, from the public to the private sector. There's going to be some legal elements, some finance element at some point within those businesses. And it struck me actually at how much of an influence both of these sectors have in society. And I would love to get your take on what role you think the finance and legal sectors can play in shaping a better society, or what would you like to see? Stephen?
Well, I'll probably go back to one of the points I said in the introduction, which is that we probably are not hugely aware of this, but one of the things that the legal sector in the UK is a sector which is used throughout the world to actually bring about the rule of law. Now, we work largely in a business setting, so this is mostly in relation to business transactions and business projects and everything else. And so we have a sector in the UK which is known for its almost complete lack of corruption, for how trustworthy it is, how sensible it is, and the world actually looks to it, and so it's one of the biggest exports that the UK has. And so I think that's something that, whilst it doesn't sort the injustice between the rich person and the poor person in one place or the other, what it does do is, for many parts of the world, and including in our own country, it gives the framework of certainty whereby people can invest in, whether it's new dual carriageways, or they can buy over certain things, or whether you go into the actual finance sector. One of the things we do is we look after pension schemes that are pension schemes for hundreds of thousands of people in this country. And whilst the day-to-day of what we're doing is creating certainty of investment and everything else, the way it trickles down into real life is all those people who are retired getting letters that they can believe in, that they can move forward with certainty that that's the income that they have, that they can pass that on to the next generation. So this whole part of certainty and lack of corruption and just precision of and confidence by which lots of parts of the economy can make its decisions, the legal sector plays a huge part in that. And so I think that's where we do bring about the ability for a justice to be delivered on a day-to-day basis, because all the people who enter into legal arrangements on projects and everything else, they do so now with certainty and not with confusion. And they do so on a basis that if things go wrong, they know how to sort it out and bring about dispute resolution and the like. So I think that's some insight into how the legal sector, as I know it, impacts on a day-to-day basis, which is obviously a bit different from the legal sector of the sort of private client area, which is another really important part of the sector.
Cool. Colin, what about you from a financial sector perspective?
Certainly, the financial sector has a huge responsibility during this this time. I think for a couple of things. One, it is the Chancellor has got what some people describe as a kind of magic money tree, that money just seems to be coming everywhere at the moment, but that needs to be paid for. So we and others have been working with the UK government and other governments around the world in how you structure that debt, how you start to pay that debt off, how to make sure that you've got investors who will take some of that debt off their hands through different bond markets, etc. So I think there's certainly a huge responsibility of the financial sector in terms of restructuring, how we balance the books. But also I think it's how we create that two things. One, sustainable investment. I think that's one of the big themes at the moment in the investment industry, that how do we create that long-term sustainability and the impact it has on the planet. But also I think it's what sort of types of investment create those economic opportunities. Stephen talked about infrastructure and some of the things that you need to do, some of these projects that create opportunities in the economy. And I think that is where we have a huge responsibility with governments and the wider economy in terms of making sure that we structure these ways beneficial to society and gives companies and individuals the opportunity to thrive. I think that is critical to what we do each day, is that creating opportunity. And again, I think we need to throw away some of those traditional things that we thought on the past and look at where the new opportunities are. I once met a chap who described himself as an entrepreneur, and he said, I never really knew what that word meant. What is an entrepreneur? And really, an entrepreneur is somebody who saw that opportunity that you and I didn't think of. And we always think, when we lift something up, why didn't I think about that? But we didn't. Somebody else did. But I think, as Christians, what does God want us to think about? Where does God want to take this, economy, this country, take our business? And Stephen said we need to surround our companies, surround our government and our country with prayer, that we'll be discerned in the right things to do. But I think both the financial sector, I think, have a huge responsibility in the post-COVID world, and we'll be supported by the legal profession to make sure we do that. And I think we can be world leaders in what we're doing. And I think Scotland has been leading the way in many ways. And I think that is what our responsibility.
Brilliant. Great. So we've got some questions from the floor. And before I move on to those, actually, just thinking a bit more about the finance and legal sectors. And I think you've probably already touched on it, so you can just let me know if you've got anything else to add. So the question is around, what action do you think that these sectors can take to address inequalities that exist in society? Because I think what we've seen over COVID is that there's increased inequality. Different people have been affected in different ways. Some people have lost their jobs. Some people actually have made money. There's quite a big spectrum of how different people have been affected. And even forgetting COVID, just in life, there's so much inequality that exists in society. So it'd be great if you've got anything to add just around how the finance and legal sectors can be used to address inequalities, or what would you like to see?
We've been taking off in a different direction, which is that I think one of the things that the legal and finance sectors can do is pay their taxes, because they are high value sectors. They're high value sectors because I think, as Colin has said and as I've referenced, is that they are very attractive on an international basis, and we're perhaps sometimes not aware of that. And so that is, they're not high value sectors because we've got a monopoly or so. They're hugely competitive sectors, but because of what we effectively are selling, and it is attractive on an international basis, what can actually be charged for that is at a higher basis. And the results of that are that they are flourishing sectors. And I think the UK, they are two of the sectors that are the high value sectors of the UK. And a country needs wealth creating sectors to pay for lots of things. And so I think, I keep saying to everybody is that the greatest pleasure in life should be to pay your taxes, because, and especially at this time, we've seen we've been reminded of the critical care of the health service and everything else. It all needs to be paid for. And so that I think one of the things that we can do in particular is to continue trying to beat the world at what we do, and to be as, I've got a very competitive edge, and to be the best that we can from this country. And I think the legal and finance sectors, among other sectors, are two that can be big service exporters. And so helping with inequality and injustice and can then be done by the actual helping the actual public state to pay and do all the things that it wants to do.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think, as they always say, God loves a cheerful giver. I think that the question of tax is a really important thing, and just as a little anecdote as well, we've almost moved to a cashless society overnight. If you think nowadays in the COVID world, you go into most shops, when was the last time you used cash? It's cards for everything. In many ways, that's a good thing because that stops leakages in the tax system. And again, it was interesting. I think it was only at the start of this year, January 2020, when we paid off the debt for the First World War, 1914. So if you think of the debt we've created now, and when that we paid off, we're leaving a huge burden on our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. So I think we have a responsibility to help businesses to grow and develop and create new jobs. But again, in that world is pay what you should be paying, don't avoid paying, because that will then make society, the country, much, much better. You can look at examples around the world where very efficient tax systems, are help economies to thrive.
Yeah. So we've got 5 minutes to go. I want to ask this question that's come from the floor. So it says, you're both in sectors where financial remuneration often seems far greater than others, which to some can wrongly imply greater value. How do you respond to those pressures, responsibilities, accusations? Stephen?
Well, as we've probably almost answered that with the last question, which is that these are they're not sectors where we're privileged, where we don't have anybody competing against us. There's a huge amount of competition, so they happen to be high value sectors, among others in the country. All sorts of software and technology are now high value sectors here as well. Life science is the same, because I think we compete well and we produce a product, if you like, which is very attractive internationally. So yeah, I can see how that feels unfair. I'd probably take it back to the point is the more that the sectors earn and the higher the wages, the more that people actually pay in taxes. And so I think that is the fundamental part where we contribute back. And we can do so many other things with our own people and dealing with injustice and everything there, but we can't do everything. But on the part of taxes, that is, I think, a real great connection with the country and a contribution to actually helping the society be the best it can be.
Brilliant.
And just to add to that, I think, I think each of us have been called to where we are, but I think we have a huge responsibility. And I always say to my staff, it's being held to account for what you do as well. I think accountability is critical, and I think if we can help develop a business and help that business grow, help that community grow, help that country grow, and we can all benefit in that. I think that is the real benefit that we can all bring. That's why I think the partnership that we have with business and government can be really, really powerful in driving the community, because we have that responsibility, to each other. And again, we should never underestimate that responsibility, and more importantly, that accountability.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you to you both. It's been a great discussion. Anything that we can pray for either of you about over the coming weeks and months? Stephen?
Well, it's probably the themes that I've mentioned. Grace every day for God's creation to flow in all our organisations. And yeah, I think we have a Jubilee moment. Let's embrace it as Christians. And be the ones that actually drive change for better, and not just change for anything else. So let's keep using the language of Christ.
And just add to that, I would just ask that we each of us pray for wisdom to find out what God's will for us is, and for God's will for our country is as well, and use this as a really important moment in history where we can really be part of significant change.
Brilliant. Great. Well, that's us nearly just on the hour. So thank you everyone for listening in. I hope you found that useful. Please do join us for our lunchtime sessions for the rest of the week. Our session tomorrow from 12 to 1 is on energy and climate, and it'll be Martin Link that will be doing that session, so it's not to be missed. And as I said, do click on the link for the bookshop and see if there's any resources that you can use to help you on your journey. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.